So I'd like to just go a little bit deeper with what we began to explore yesterday. I understand that with the personal mind, that what I'm talking about can be actually of very little interest. It doesn't seem very relevant. You know, what we really want to find out as spiritual personalities is a sense of how's this going to help me in my life? You know, fundamentally, we want to know how is this going to relieve our suffering. And so we start to point the attention into the stories about the suffering in whatever way. Or if we're really wired up as a spiritual personality, we tend to look at the sort of an ambition within the spiritual personality. And the ambition comes in the form of, you know, getting the right teacher. Sometimes there's a little bit of a sort of a hierarchy of who's got the best teacher, but you know, we don't talk about that because it's not considered polite. Or we end up, you know, just whatever it takes. And so we may go to retreat after retreat after retreat, or, you know, now because it's so available on the computer, we take all the courses and, you know, we sit in our living room and, you know, we go through all of this training, this teaching. And we read all the books and, you know, so I know that most within this room, if you've not already done that, you're pretty much finished with it. And so that very intense phase of the spiritual seeker, it burns out on its own. And the reason it burns out on its own, because it actually doesn't work. You know, you just find over and over and over and over, no matter who you go see, no matter who you sit with, no matter how many books you read, no matter what it is that you're trying to achieve, it doesn't work. And of course, it's a very simple matter of why it doesn't work, is because that beautiful impulse that wakes up within you, that is awareness itself, and it starts to look for itself, right? It starts to come back for itself in the human experience. But because the habit is to look outside, then that's the natural movement. And so we literally move away from that beautiful, innocent impulse of awareness itself, but we look away from it. Right? I mean, we've all done that. Everyone within this room, more or less, has sort of played that out. And then, of course, it's guaranteed to fail because we're going away from ourselves. You know, we may have glimpses, and depending on the transmission or the precision of words coming from the teacher or the guide, we can have glimpses. Or that is actually waking up to itself and beginning to come back for itself. It is stimulated because, you know, we've come together in situations or atmosphere that's designed to stimulate our own nature. So we'll end up having glimpses. And glimpses, of course, are not to be dismissed. You know, glimpses are like the water and, you know, the wind that wears down. It makes the Grand Canyon, right? Eventually, it starts to wear down. And the glimpses start to inform, and the glimpses start to be familiar. But then usually the phase sets up where I've got it and I've lost it. You know, you go to the retreat and there's something very deep that happens, and we're still a little bit in trying to achieve mode. And so it's wonderful, something opens and the whole thing collapses, and you know, the light shines through, and I'm speaking for myself. I was addicted to that for, you know, 10, 15 years or more. And then you go home and you kind of see, I mean, you get busy and you live your life. Like your life is the most important thing, whatever we define our life as, right? So we live our life, we get busy. That's the American mantra, is we're very, very busy. And then, of course, that sort of static quality and that identity of our lives and our being busy, then it clouds the glimpse. And then we become very, upset or bereft about that. I actually just became more and more depressed about it. It was almost like I didn't want to go to retreats anymore because I couldn't take the opening and then the closing. I couldn't take it. It just became too painful. It was just too difficult. And it went on for years. Like I said, I can be kind of a slow learner sometimes. So somewhere along the line, it starts to dawn that this is not really about making our lives better. I mean, that's a side effect. It truly is a side effect. Because you begin to see what thoughts really are. You begin to understand the conditioning. It comes from God knows where, parents, ancestors, culture, experiences, karmic, the karmic wheel, all of the experience that we've gathered, as a soul along the way. So our lives do improve, and so that's sort of like feeds the addiction, right? Okay, another retreat, or another teacher, or another book, or maybe if I went directly to India, or Tibet, or whatever, then that would do it. But it starts to dawn, and it's a very fortunate dawning that takes place. And that is, maybe this is not about improving and relieving suffering of the life. Maybe this is there's something else here. And the something else begins to become more prominent, which is what started this whole search in the beginning. And that it starts to, this awareness that has been in the background, and it comes forward in glimpses, and then it sort of goes back as we live our lives. And it starts to be a little bit more prominent, a little bit more familiar. And in that familiarity, there is a natural turning towards it. You just naturally start to bring your attention towards it. Because awareness, or spirit, or, the divine, whatever you want to call this, that we are all interconnected and imbued by, enlivened by, really. We wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for this spirit of life. It starts to shine through in a way and become prominent in the life, in a way that turning towards it wants to know that more than making our life comfortable. And there's that sort of fork in the road, if you want to call it a spiritual unfolding. And that fork in the road is, there are those who just go, this is enough. I've looked at my stories, I can see where they're coming from, that they're really not true. That this interior suffering that's caused by, mind and discomfort within the body, the stories that we tell ourselves, that's opened up enough. There's enough space now that I think I'm just going to live my life from here. And that's really perfectly fine. I used to think in myself and for others, which was, of course, my mistake, that you pushed past that. That wasn't acceptable. And I really did think that. That just stopping and saying, you know, my life's pretty good. And that's as far as you want to go with it. Now I see that there's just great compassion for that. It's perfectly fine. Why not? But there's another fork in the road, and that one seems to carry on, and I call it, you know, it's the relentless one. It doesn't care if you've got a nice little life and you've relieved a certain amount of suffering and you're doing okay, just doing what you're doing. It could care less. There's a momentum that is already happening. It's like a current. And that current becomes the most prominent aspect of the life. It becomes more prominent than being comfortable, staying safe. Should I get a divorce? Should I not get a divorce? Should I, leave for here? Should I, whatever it is, that we have sort of protected ourselves a little bit against uncertainty and the unknown. Because that current, the way that current is, it is in the unknown. That's what it is. And so there has to be already kind of a momentum, or kind of maybe an insanity. I think mine was kind of an insanity, and it was just, it will do whatever it takes. And if it has to jump into the unknown, that's what it'll do. There's this classic, I don't know, maybe some of you remember the stories, the Castaneda stories, right? And, there's that whole moment, and I forget which book it is, but it was my favorite book. And he's with another apprentice, and the other shaman is with him, and they're on the edge of the, I've probably told this story so many times, but it's one of my favorites. And I can tell them as many as I want to. So, it's sort of on this edge of this, cliff. And Don Juan said, jump. And they're going, are you crazy? We'll die. And he said, jump. And he's going, well, I've trusted you. I've trusted you everything else that you've pointed out and you've directed all through this time. And that's important. A body of experience starts to develop where you are willing, as a personality, and this is what I'm speaking from, you will jump into your dissolution. You will do that. Do you hear what I'm trying to say? So they jumped. They lived. But it's just a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor. Because when that current starts to lead your life, you're no longer like 1 foot here, identified with the person and trying to keep your life nice and safe and comfortable in the way you've always known it. And then you've got another foot here, and that is, quickly dissolving any sense of who you thought you were. And you're trying to, I always think of the perfect image is this boat, it's a classic metaphor, you get into the boat and the current takes you. But, as you're like trying to move away from the shore, you like throw out the leg. And, you're going to maneuver this current and something has to give, right? And so that's that metaphor of death, of dissolution, of jumping over the cliff. You don't know, the person doesn't know what you're stepping into because its nature is unknown. You've looked around and you've read a lot of stories, and frankly, a lot of it doesn't sound very appealing to the person, right? And something just does it anyway. And that's that shift, where the personality, the identity of the personality is designed for survival. It has an innate structure, an innate survival structure. It's set up to survive and for the ego to survive. So there has to be, in a way, a going against that and saying, okay. Because the person and the mind does not know what letting that go is like. It can't, it's impossible. The body of experience of these glimpses and abidings and seeing it and creates, kind of a trust, and that really isn't quite the right word, but it's as close as I can come. And then that trust starts to create, like some faith. Okay, I don't know what's on the other side because it's actually totally impossible, but something is willing and something knows itself enough that it trusts that this current that you begin to see that has been leading your entire life. There's not one thing in your life that has not been guided and directed by this current. Not my will, but thy will. It's been true all along. But, the mind then grabs it and creates it and owns it and does all sorts of things with it. So when that takes place and the life actually begins to consciously lead and direct what's happening in one's life, and there's a softening and an opening and a recognition that guidance, not my will but thy will, who frankly used to just terrify me when I'd hear that or talk to teachers that would talk about that. I would just go, are you kidding? There's no way. But when you start to get what that really truly is expressing, then you go, well, let's see, the personality with all of its conditionings and fears and hidden agendas and manipulations and all of that, that's leading the life, right? That's what we think should be in control, right? Or the source of wisdom and the source of love, and actually has been leading the life all along, right? So you just go, and then you pull the foot that's still trying to hold on to the old life out, and you stand firmly and let the current take you. And it doesn't mean that the mind won't complain and carry on, and there's different unhooking, however you want to call that, of identities that it will not like. It's more upset about its favorite things, its most beautiful identities, because it's afraid it's going to lose them. And of course what you find is nothing is lost, it's just that separate, constricted identity. That's what's unhooking. Do you hear what I'm saying? It seems like I'm kind of losing. You hearing? Okay. So when that unhooks, and the mind will do whatever the mind is going to do. And sometimes you just have to go through that. And it isn't pretty. And people around you are going, oh my God, I thought you knew better than that. I can't help it. My mind is very upset right now. And then, of course, the other side of that unhooking and the complaints of the mind and whatever kind of happens there. And for most, it happens over and over and over. That's the deal. Is then what's available is so much greater and freer and truer than the mind could have ever imagined. There's literally never, ever, ever any sacrifice. But if you listen to the mind during those transition periods, it appears that there's a huge sacrifice. And so that body of experience really, 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 really helps, because you can look back and see that unhooking from, your personal idea of being a parent, or your personal idea of being a husband or a wife, or your personal idea of your sense of what makes a secure life. When that starts to unhook, then actually what reveals itself is the freedom to really be in relationship. Because you're free from all the old conditioning. There's just this loving openness there. When you're unhooking from your personal idea of security, what you find out is you start to open to the natural abundance of life. Right? Life is profoundly, unfathomably abundant. The rain happens, right? Sun rises, sun sets. You put a seed in the ground and food happens. There's water that's below the ground or comes to you by a stream or a river or, however form. It's unfathomably abundant, unimaginably abundant. So just these unhookings from your idea of what that security is, then the reality rushes in. Because it's not possible when that little constriction of identity is hooked in. It's not possible. You can be really good with perhaps, money and making money and, handling money, or you can be really lousy at it, but both are conditioning. You aren't going to lose your ability to be really good at it when you unhook. It will just allow you to experience abundance, period. And, when you unhook your ideal, or identity of a good husband or a good wife or a good lover or a good relationship or a good mother or a good father, whatever it is that you aren't going to lose any of that. It actually will allow you just to be deeply present. And, if there are conditionings that are not allowing that full meeting, they will be presented. But they'll be presented in a way that then you can see them from this wholeness, rather than person trying to turn around and look at its conditioning. It doesn't work out all that well, does it? Though sometimes, it's helpful to look at our patterns, of course. But when it comes from this open reality of our own nature, then there's insight and clarity and informing, and there's not this personal agenda that you're trying to defend and fight. So to deeply point your attention to, not deeply, to wholly point your attention to the actuality of your nature, then creates a very deep kind of stabilization. I wish I could remember, it's this quote in the Bible, cleave unto thyself, right? It's something maybe a little bit different, but you know what I'm saying. You cleave unto oneself. You come home unto oneself. And you don't come home to the sense of the person. That's a kind of an error. That deep stabilization, that deep abiding, that deep sense of, I'm here. I'm here, through all appearances that happen on the planet, including death. There's something that remains, even when the body drops away. What is that? So when one turns and actually is identified or fused or rests or abides, whatever those words are that best describes it for you. And it's very important to find, I think, language that best describes that for you. Very intimate, personal language. When you come unto oneself, it's very helpful to have a clear view of what that is. It's very, very helpful. When we talk about the dark ground, it's very, a description is going, there's no light, there's no description. It isn't, Marika was trying to, she said she spent years trying to depict that in her painting, the luminous dark. Very challenging. It was hidden as secret teachings in most traditions until actually quite recently. In fact, very few teachers talk about it. I was so thrilled when we have a teacher here in Crestone, up at the Dharma Ocean. I think what's it called? Blazing Mountain now or something. Reggie Ray. And he began to describe it and talk about it. And he talked about it, how it was accessible within the body. Though it was interesting, I did several kind of sessions with people that were going through that course. And because it's a practice, he gave this very clear and simple practice to find it, to access it within your body. And so when they were on the cushion, there it was, and they'd sort of do the practice, and then they'd get off the cushion, and that awareness stayed on the cushion. Do you hear what I'm trying to say? And they'd get up and walk away with no sense of that fundamental ground that's awake now in the body. I thought that was interesting. I'm sure that didn't happen to everyone, but 2 or 3 people I talked to, it was the practice. Instead of, what happens is when you begin to access consciously this dark, stable, peaceful root, resting. What happens is it literally, because it's in the cells, it's the background of everything. It's the background of your bones, of your belly, of your skin, of your hair, of the sky, of this wood. There's nothing that it's not the background of. It's the foundation of everything. So when awareness makes that conscious, touches that, and that becomes conscious, then that's awake in the cells. It's always been there, now it's just conscious. So it isn't like something that is only accessible when you meditate. It's constantly accessible now. But because the habit is so strong to put it as a practice or put it as a category in our lives, or to bring the attention to the mind, the contents of the mind, the habit of the mind, the reflections of the mind, then we tend to just sort of become unconscious again. And then we sit down on the cushion and go, oh yeah, okay, here I am. Deep, rooted stillness. Here I am. So in most cases, it's over and over and over and over. And then again, there's just this momentum that builds, and you start to, it doesn't matter what you're doing, this deep sense of peace and root and stillness is awake. And sometimes you may have to stop and go, is it present right here? Sometimes, especially if my life is asking a lot, I do that, 100 times a day or more. Is it here? Right here? Yeah. How could it not be? Are you breathing? Are you alive? It's the womb. then it starts to dawn that it cannot be but constant. It cannot be but constant. In fact, it's the only thing that is constant. And so being busy or living your life or being stirred up or upset or whatever it is that you are, it's no longer, it can't cover it up. You know, you could be in LA traffic, and that's the essence that's driving. Or you can, you know, have a totally chaotic day or week or whatever. And that's the essence that is enlivening everything that's happening. It's the source of life. And so rather than you seeking for it or looking for it or trying to make it happen in some kind of a formula or a practice, it's the intimacy of your own nature. It's here. I'm here. And it never could have been anywhere else. So that journey that kind of goes out and then it comes back. That intimacy, that's what we're really looking for. You know, I don't know how to even begin to imagine this, but I've heard it, that all of the suffering that has happened upon the planet is simply the recognition or the delusion that we are separate from each other, from the earth, from our spirit. Can you imagine that? I mean, I can't imagine that, but can you kind of sense that? All that we have done to one another would not be done if we had a sense of interconnection. I mean, that doesn't mean we'd be living in some golden la-la land. That's not what the earth is about. But how could we live upon her as we are if we were a part of her? And how could we do that to one another if we were a part of one another? You know, Mark and I were talking a little bit about the image that has caught the world's attention, about the young boy, the young 3-year-old boy that had drowned. And we'd been hearing, right, for weeks and weeks and weeks of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people drowning and dying, and, you know, the refugee, whatever you want to call it. It's happened many times, but we now know about it. But there was this image, and we connected to that image. We felt a kinship, a connection to the innocence of that, right? It's changing how it's being viewed worldwide. So we couldn't and wouldn't be doing this to one another if we had a kinship. If we really understood that we're not separate and that we can't be separate, and that it isn't someone else's fault, the bad guy's fault. I went to this wonderful talk with a lovely teacher that had come to Boulder, Prim Baba. I think I talked about him a little bit. And he gave this incredible talk. It was so beautiful. It was just so beautiful, so just exquisitely clear. And the transmission in the atmosphere. And he was really calling everyone to come forward in a kind of an urgency. He's just saying, you know, it's now, my brothers and sisters. And he just, you know, of the oneness of all things, and talking about, you know, we blame the corporations and we blame, I mean, Crestone's great at that. What is that called when you're into, conspiracy theories? And not that all of them probably don't have, you know, some truth to them, you know, they're all stories and probably are true. But they're pretty wild here. You know, I had a guy that used to come and help me in the garden, and he'd tell me these wild, you know, stories. And whoa, wow, wow. I can only handle, like, I need to weed the garden, let alone, you know, the reptiles are with us, and, you know, it's created. And there's, what is it called, the jet streams? Chemtrails, and they're dropping, you know. And maybe so, I'm not negating it, but, God, I forgot what I was going to say. So, you know, it's just this multiple possibilities. But it was always the theme of the conspiracies and everything else is that there's the bad guy, and that's over there, and I am the good guy. And then I can talk about and put down and feel okay and safe because I am the good guy, and that is the bad guy. And he was just, you know, giving in this brilliant way that that's impossible. We are interconnected. It's impossible. It all is within us, every bit of it. You know, that's when you really start to get what true compassion actually is. It's not that, you know, I recycle and, you know, I eat vegan and I, you know, whatever. And that's wonderful. I mean, of course, you want to live with some kind of clarity upon the planet, some kind of intention. But compassion then is actually born when you see that within you, and I speak of the interconnected being, all greed, shadow, violence, stealing, it's all present. It's all a part of this kinship. That's when compassion actually is really born. That's when humbleness actually happens. When you can actually enter the dark valleys, the shadows. So anyway, at the end of this talk, this guy gets up and he just begins to rant about the corporations and the bad guys, and we need to inform them and we need to educate them, and I just, oh God, oh no. Poor Prem Baba. It was perfect. I was listening, I was telling you yesterday about this wonderful conference or talk, I guess it was a retreat that Sogyal Rinpoche gave on the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And he said, you know, I've been teaching for 20 years, and you know what what I figured out? You just never, ever, ever give up. Cool, that's really great instructions. So I thought about that with Prem Baba. Well, give that talk again. Right? Just keep giving that beautiful talk. So when you then, the attention actually is more interested or aligned to your fundamental nature, then which is actually quite undescribable. You know, there's many that are quite beautiful. They're wood masters, and they've done their very, very best to describe it. But it can only take you to the edge of it. It can't take you all the way. It'll point you to the right direction. Probably poetry is much more able to do that than, you know, even just our simple our language as we normally use it. It has to be experienced. And so there has to be a willingness to go and look and be willing to not know, and then the experience itself will draw you into it. I don't remember exactly how St. John of the Cross said that, but he talked about that. And then you will be in that actually is undescribable. That actually all of the senses, when he said that he, touched the back of my neck, I can't remember exactly how he said. Pinched the back of my neck and all the senses stopped. At least my own personal experience, the very first experience with that was exactly what happened. And I was frankly bummed out because I was used to the light, presence, brilliance, beauty, soaring, dancing, and kind of flowed out of the meditation hall, and everything was like bright and gorgeous and beautiful, and don't put it down unless you've experienced it. I mean, it's great, right? It's gorgeous. So the first experience of the dark ground was there was no taste, no light, no sound, no feeling, no experience. Now later, when I began to be with, my teacher, and other people were experiencing that, and he just explained that that's just sort of the edge of it. And that's where many, many people pull back. They go, what's that? Because the mind then starts to really sense that it's a dissolution. They call it the little death. And then the mind starts to backpedal. My experiences with my teacher as a retreat leader, that was probably 90% of the freak out. Was people would, open up to that, and it was just too much. And there was this extreme panic and extreme fear. That's why it's so vital, and I attempt to point it out, is that it happens within the body. That you access it actually within your body. Because the body is a sense of, you're familiar, your home. It's the earth element. The earth element has a kind of a nurturing, kind of a safe quality to it. But for whatever reason, even though personally, I didn't really like it, it didn't really matter. There was just a knowing. It knew itself. And so it wanted nothing else but that. And it just kept going back and going back. And it wasn't like I was trying to re-experience a glimpse. Every experience was deeper and different. But there was a knowing just to point the attention to that. And for whatever reason, it woke up in my body. I didn't even know that until someone lent me Reggie Ray's course, and I went, that's where it always woke up here. I don't know why. So there was never any fear at all. But it wasn't really, I didn't really like it particularly as a person. But you find out that doesn't matter at all. Your mind can have all sorts of, I like this and I don't like this and I want to do this and I don't want to do that. And none of it matters. It just kind of does this over here. And something is just falling and opening and, jumping off cliffs and dying and, You just learn to not believe it. Because you can't control it most of the time. The mind's going to do what the mind is going to do. And then, the precision. That's why I really admire in many ways the Tibetan approach, because the precision of their pointing out and the precision of their language and the precision of the description of the clear light, which is, the ground as luminous. You hear that? The ground as luminous. It can't be separated out. It's impossible to separate it out. We only do it as sort of like a little experiment or a little game until we become familiar with just the total, still silence. Nothing. And then something, as we were talking last night with Catherine, and something, if it's not grasped onto, subtly held, will just bring you into the great space, the luminous, the interconnected, the love, the background of all form. One of the great tragedies in the human experience is, I don't have enough love. I mean, I knew that very, very intimately. The air you're breathing is love. The bones and the muscle and the blood in your body is made up of love. As you're with your lover and you're wanting more love from him or her, and you're both made up of love, and the atmosphere between you is love. And that's the great tragedy. So to have a sense of that, you don't have to be clairvoyant and see. Sometimes that helps, because as a culture, as a human being, but I think especially as this culture, we're really wired into the seeing. So maybe that can be helpful to see. But for most of us, we sense it. It's known. It's a knowing, and not a conceptual knowing, but a knowing. And then instead of being drawn to trying to direct our life, figure our life out, make our life different, make other people around us different, just that control and manipulate and move around and whatever it is that you call that we do as human beings. We come back to this sense of deep stillness. Always. That's the compass. That's the lover. That's the guide. That's the teacher. That's the companion. That's the friend. And then naturally, it begins to move and express itself and recreate itself continuously in the myriad of forms. And so then spirit and form, our inner and our outer, our lives, and then our spiritual life, all that collapses. It becomes totally irrelevant. There's a beautiful teaching, and maybe I can get it precise. First there's just the world, and then there's only God, and then the world and God collapses. That's the journey. That's the journey. And then that whole thing, of ordinary and spiritual, and in your body and not in your body, and I can't wait to wake up so I can get the hell out of here, all that stuff, it all just dies. I'm a spiritual personality. Well, I'm not. I'm a hedonist. I'm an ordinary person. None of that can hold up there. It doesn't matter. If you want to dance and kick back a few beers and wine, you do that. If the way your life moves through you, that, it doesn't work for you, you don't do that. You have a green smoothie every morning. I mean, fine. You know what I'm trying to say? It does not matter at all. The whole division between emptiness and form, the whole division between spirit and life, the whole division between what I do with my life and what I don't do with my life. Something else guides that. And what guides that is whole and is sane and is wise and it is connected and it comes from balance and will bring the life back into balance. Because that's what it is. It's whole. So all of these ideas and debates and the ways that we are at war with each other, they just collapse. They just collapse. So I encourage in the time that we have together, even if you are brilliantly, unfathomably, amazingly awake, that's great, is to let that bring you back to just this simple, simple, simple stillness. The willingness to go to what the mind cannot know. And it's infinite. There's no place to land there or claim. And it will bring you also of itself, which is compassion and interconnectedness, the dynamic aspect of itself called love. Spontaneously, perfectly designed for this body-mind structure. Nothing will be out of place. But that unhooking, continual unhooking, don't kid yourself. There has to be an okayness with that, a willingness for that. That's the deal. Right? That's the deal.